What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Chill Taste Podcast. I'm your host, Darian, and we have a jam packed show for you today. I have a jam packed show for you all today. For all those who haven't subscribed and they're listening right now, please subscribe to the channel. We're almost at 500 subs. I appreciate all comments, shares, and likes on this video. So let's get right into it. As you can see in the title, NFL head coaching vacancies. There's still a good amount of jobs open out there in the league, and also previewing the NFL division round playoffs. I'll talk more about that on the back end. So if you want to hear my takes on that, go ahead and fast forward to the end or just hang around because there is a lot to discuss about the head coaching vacancies available in the league. So right now we have eight jobs open, I should say. Nine in total, but one got filled, not officially, but all signs point to John Harbaugh heading to the Giants, and I will touch base on that first. But most importantly, during this podcast, I want to talk about, maybe one or two candidates and why I think this team should head that direction, right? Possible coordinators that could be attached to this head coach and, what this head coach can bring to this organization and get them back on track to being a stable team, a more, how do I say this, a competent team, and also a winning organization as well. Because, of course, more times than not, for the teams that have fired their head coaches, they're not winning and they're not, a competent franchise unless you're the Steelers or the Ravens. So, but we're going to start things off with the New York Giants, man. Like I said, it hasn't been officially announced, but all signs point to John Harbaugh heading to the New York Giants. It's pretty much locked and loaded. You know what I'm saying? Signed, something to deliver, however you want to say it, man. I just think it just needs to be ruffled out what type of staff he can bring over and also contract verbiage and whatnot as well, right? I've been told, I'm sorry. I've read, I said I've been told, I've read that he could be making north of $20 million annually, which will put him up there as being one of the higher paid coaches in football. I think that's deserved. I mean, John Harbaugh has been, one of the more winning head coaches in football. Granted, he's had a franchise quarterback in Lamar Jackson to prolong his last 8 years or so, because for a lot of Raven fans have been saying that, if it weren't for Lamar coming in, Harbaugh may have been fired back in, 2018, 2019. So, but that's just how it happens in this league, right? Sometimes these players do save these coaches and sometimes these coaches save these franchises. So, it's a catch 2020, as you would say, right? But yes, Harbaugh heading to the New York Giants. I mean, I wrote down in my notes, I said, and I made a tweet about this as well. I think this is probably the most excited the Giants can be about their football team since probably their last Super Bowl, right? Or maybe their last, playoff appearance, with Brian Dable going up against the Vikings back in 2022, or the year they went to the playoffs against the Green Bay Packers on the road and they lost, unfortunately. But, there hasn't been much, much to celebrate in the Giants fandom as of late. But I think this one right here is up there with one of the greater times as of right now in Giants football history, right? I mean, the Giants have been through the ringer with coaches. Since the departure of Tom Coughlin, I mean, they've had some pretty rough hires, right? Ben McAdoo, Pat Shermer, Joe Judge, Brian Dable. I feel like as if I'm forgetting another one as well, but it's been some really rough hires, right? And they've had some success, with Ben McAdoo, and then of course Brian Dable as a recent, but it hasn't been continuous success and nothing they can clutch on to as to being their, primary and long-term answer, right? So now you have John Harbaugh, who's a bit older, right? But I think, he brings in that stability. He can establish a culture. And most importantly, competency, right? The Giants haven't had competency from a head coach since Tom Coughlin, and that was back in 2016, right? When he left the Giants organization. So damn near 10 years ago, as well, I guess you can say now 10 years ago, right? So it's been a long time coming, but I do believe John Harbaugh can bring in those three things I mentioned: stability, culture, and I do believe it'll be a winning culture because, of course, during his time with the Ravens, did a lot of winning. Most importantly, competency, right? So how would the staff look? And also, what is he inheriting? I think what made this Giants job attractive to Harbaugh, and also one of the more attractive jobs in the current vacancy amongst teams in the league, is that they have young talent and also they have some veteran talent that isn't too old, right? Offensively, they have Jackson Dart, who looks to be their franchise quarterback, right? They have Malik Neighbors, even though he's injured right now, but he should be back at full strength. They have Cam Scatterboo, right? They're going to draft more weapons on offense from a receiving and running back two, or maybe even one primary skill position group, right? They look at their offensive line, one of the more underrated groups in football, in my opinion, led by Andrew Thomas. They have guys like Jermaine Eleanor, and if he gets brought back, so on and so forth. But, they have some building block pieces on offense. And defensively, of course, in my opinion, that is where the veteran talent steps up in my eyes, right? You have Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau now, who's entering, I want to say, year 5, right? And then you have guys like Paulson Adebo, hopefully can shake back this year. Javon Holland, so they have a lot of notable names on the side of the football that it's a lot of talent there, but they haven't been coached the right way, right? Someone like Shane Bowen, who was there with Brian Dable, was a failure as a DC. I think a lot of people will admit that, right? He was one of the worst DCs probably in Giants history. That defense was underperforming, underwhelming with all that talent, right? He had to go. And that was one of the bigger flaws of Brian Dable's tenure, although he could, scheme up some things offensively for the team, especially when they got better quarterback play. It's the defense that just hindered his team too much, and it came back to bite him, right? He was terrible at his coordinating hires. And I think one thing about Harbaugh, he has been pretty decent, way more than Brian Dable, in my opinion, with his coordinating hires. And I think a lot of people are going to point to, okay, Harbaugh, who can you bring in, right? Are you going to be able to retain someone like Todd Monken, who I think is a shoo-in to be the OC right now? I don't believe Greg Roman's heading over. And if he is, it'll be for a position coach, right? Because the Harbaughs and Roman have a lot of familiarity dating back to his times with, of course, John and both Jim Harbaugh, right? And I think they even dated back to days at Michigan as well, right? So it's a lot of continuity with Greg Roman, but I do believe Todd Monken will come over and be the team's OC. And I think that would be an excellent hire at OC, because even though he may have been getting pushed out of the Baltimore Ravens, organization during the last year or so, I think it was more so on the talent, the lack of talent they had on offense and the receiving department. And most importantly as well, the team was banged up like crazy on offense, right? Lamar Jackson missed a ton of games this year. So, I think offensively, there's promise. Defensively, though, I think John is going to realize the wrongdoings he did during his, the tail end of his tenure with the Ravens, and retaining someone like Zach Orr, who should have been let go, right? Zach Orr is arguably one of the worst defensive coordinators in Ravens franchise history, right? And someone like Anthony Weaver, who was on that same staff as I want to say D-Lions coach, went to Miami, kind of got that Dolphins defense playing a lot better football, right? Had an all-pro linebacker in Jordan Brooks, who he coached up really well. And most importantly, turned that defense from being a bit soft to a bit more tough, especially given the personnel. And I think if you have someone like Anthony Weaver coming over with the current personnel the Giants have, that'll be an excellent pickup. Now, of course, you have other names like, I want to say there's another coach by the last name Robinson. He's kind of been floating around. I think he was their cornerbacks coach with the Ravens. But if I'm not mistaken, he may have gotten let go during his tenure there. I could be wrong, though, and I can't pull it up right now. But I think Anthony Weaver will be the ideal choice without question. And, just to, tail off on this about Harbaugh going to the Giants, a lot of people may point to this being a Pete Carroll 2.0, but I don't think so, right? I think this is an opportunity for John, who is not even a year or two removed from the league, can step in seamlessly and pretty much correct the wrong things he did with the Ravens and focus it on building a better foundation with the Giants, competing for a playoff spot, maybe even making a postseason run. Most importantly, having a coordinator in place who can take over when he's done, right? Because it looks as if he's getting a 5-year contract. Harbaugh is about 65, 66 years old. I doubt he stays all 5 years, in my opinion. So I think this could be a run where we see 3 years from now, Harbaugh has some success, maybe 1 or 2 playoff appearances during his time there. And then, the heir apparent steps up and takes over. It could be Anthony Weaver, maybe Todd Monken. Who knows? But I think this is going to be a good building block for the Giants to go forward, to have that stability, winning culture, and most importantly, competency for the head coaching position. So that's my take on that, man. That's a great hire, and I think the Giants are going to, bode well from this. Moving on, though, to the next big opening, maybe not from a personnel standpoint, but from the history of what this new head coach is taking over. would be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I've had my gripes about Mike Tomlin, right? I may have not said it publicly, but my friends who watch this know how I feel about Mike Tomlin, right? I think he is a future Hall of Fame coach. I think he definitely did a lot of great things for this organization in totality, right? Winning early on and having that sustained success. However, the main reason on why Tomlin and the Steelers decided to part ways, and it was more so a Tomlin thing, in my opinion, from what I've been reading, is that in the league, you are here to win and compete for championships. Although Mike Tomlin was winning 19 straight years of consecutive winning seasons, he was nowhere near pretty much throughout these last 8 years or so competing for championships, right? It was clear, very clear, right? The Steelers hadn't won a playoff game since the Obama administration, right? It's been a very long time, 7 consecutive losses in the first round. And with how the roster construction was going, the inability to develop and identify a long-term answer for quarterback, it was time. And I think Steelers fans understood that, and a lot of them wanted this. And I think this was the right decision. I've always been saying that it was time for them to part ways. Divorce had to happen, right? Not because Tomlin is a bad head coach, but more so he was not able to get any more out of this Steelers core. Now, of course, you hear the backlash. Oh, they're going to regret this. The grass isn't always greener, so on and so forth. But I think it is, man. Granted, I do believe the Steelers will be bad next year. They'll be an average team, below average team, right? Maybe 5, 4 wins, maybe even 6 wins. Whoever takes over as head coach, right? Because they have a talentless group in some key areas. Receiving room isn't that good, right? Outside of DK Metcalf. The cornerback room outside of JPJ isn't that good either, right? And their veteran guys are a lot older on the defensive line. Guys like TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, right? A lot of older guys up front. But they have some building blocks. And why I say it's okay to be bad the following year is simply because you can put yourself in the best position possible, better than you've had in the last 7 years, to draft talented players with higher draft picks, franchise quarterback, franchise cornerstone pieces on offense and defense. You get what I'm saying right now? So I think this bodes well for them. Now, of course, you must land the head coach. And I'm looking at the head coaching candidates they've been interviewing. Someone that stands out to me that also can come over and really grow with this organization. We've seen this before, right? They hired Mike Tomlin really young. They hired Bill Cowher very young as well. So they've only had 2 head coaches in the last, damn near 40 years. It is simply because they were able to grow with this organization. And I think a guy that stands out to me that has that defensive mindset, right? You could go offense, but maybe if you want to stay on defense, has that players coach mentality, has that no nonsense mentality, but also most importantly, the innovation to understand how the game is moving from an offensive standpoint. Not saying Tomlin didn't, but I think with fresh eyes and a new voice and a new mindset, you can see things transpire. And I'm talking about Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams. Now, of course, you hear things like Nate Shieldhouse. I think I say his last name. Forgive me. He's the pass giving coordinator for the Rams, and he could be in mentioning for a head coaching job. But I do believe a pairing between Chris and Nate, Chris as head coach, Nate as OC, will be excellent for this Steelers team. I think he brings in innovation, paired with great defense, and also a mind that can continue to grow, develop, and show that, creativity in the league from a defensive play calling standpoint and a offensive play calling standpoint with Nate Shieldhouse. So I think that'll be a great hire. Like I said, it's a risky hire, nevertheless, though. But if you look at all the teams in football recently who have made these hires, are all going for young player coaches that have that leader amongst men, no nonsense mentality, right? And I think you always want to go for what's working best in football right now. And that's, of course, the Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay tree. And, of course, Chris Shula and Nate Shieldhouse come from the Sean McVay tree. Now, the second option, and I definitely consider this a first option as well, is Brian Flores, right? I think Brian Flores has grown a lot since his Dolphins days. I know you hear comments from Ryan Fitzpatrick and, former players saying that, oh, well, it may not work out wherever he goes next because he still has that, what's the word? He still has that. How can I say this? Damn, I'm losing my train of thought in a sense, but he has that non-relatability to his coaching style, right? He's not relatable. He's kind of a dictator in a sense. He's shelled off to himself, right? He's not a player's coach primarily, but he's more so like the Bill Belichick way, but in his version, right? He wants the best for his players. He wants the best product on the field, and he's going to get the best out of his players, right? But also, he can find himself being unrelatable. And I think hearing Ryan Fitzpatrick speak on that, he was able to develop that towards, at one point, during his time with the Dolphins, but at some point it disappeared. And of course, it could be from reasons, that has been specified of him and I want to say Chris Smith, the general manager, the used to be general manager for the Dolphins, not seeing eye to eye with certain draft pick choices, so on and so forth. And we all know he didn't want to. He wanted Herbert, and the whole back and forth of that. It could have been that, right? You know what I'm saying? Especially when you are supposed to be aligned with someone, and they're not trying to really hear you out on what they should do from a coaching standpoint. They draft who you don't want to draft, and of course, it doesn't bode well. So, but I think he's learned from that. I really do. I believe during his time with the Vikings, learning with Kevin O'Connell, being around more a Sean McVay vibe, right? Of course, right? Being more relatable, you know what I'm saying? Having to be more of a coach, right? And coach up younger players. I think with the Patriots, he was coaching up a lot of vets. And of course, he had Bill Belichick pretty much calling the shots and he was reiterating them. And I think now with Kevin O'Connell letting him do his thing, right, getting the best out of these players and also putting up a phenomenal scheme out there in Minnesota, I definitely believe that he's learned from that. He'll be an excellent head coach wherever he goes. And I think Steelers would be an amazing fit. But also, as I transition to the next team, I think the Baltimore Ravens would be an excellent fit for Brian Flores. All the things I just said, right? He can bring in that no-nonsense mentality, something the Ravens desperately need right now, in my opinion. But also, he can bring in that elite defensive philosophy, something that it didn't have with, of course, John Harbaugh, who's more of a CEO, but he predicates himself on a position. And I think if you can come in with that philosophy, with that mindset, with that scheme, with the personnel they have already, with additional pieces being added in the draft and free agency, I think the Ravens can get right back on track into being a Super Bowl contender. Now, of course, one would say, well, maybe the no nonsense mentality may not work with guys that are, already proven, right? Unlike the Vikings, they didn't really have a lot of all pro guys out there in regards to what the Ravens have, but you have guys that are willing listeners, in my opinion. They come from teams that have been successful during their college days, right? Lamar played with Bobby Petrino. Roquan Smith played under Mark Richt and of course Kirby Smart, guys that have been players coached and also a bit of that no nonsense mentality. Kirby Smart, right? Kyle Hamilton playing under Marcus Freeman, or Brian Kelly. So, it's just like I see the vision with, someone like Brian Flores going to the Ravens. Now, who was his OCB? I think the biggest thing about Brian Flores, of course, is being able to identify what offense works best in this league, right? And I think him being under KOC, being around KOC, I think he would definitely be able to grab somebody from that staff, rather if it's a passing game coordinator or an offensive coordinator right now, because we all know KOC calls plays, but he can go over there and grab someone who isn't calling plays that understands the new mindset and the new philosophy and the new scheme of how these modern day offenses work. I think you can pair them up together in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson and the piece they have to come in the free agency and draft. That'd be a hell of a pairing as well, right? And you also got guys like Jesse Minter. Jesse Minter will be a great addition to this Ravens team, and transitioning to him next, I think a great fit for him would be the Miami Dolphins for Jesse Minter, if it's not the Baltimore Ravens, because we all know he has that continuity and familiarity with Baltimore, being there previously, or no, he wasn't there in Baltimore. Maybe he was as a position coach, but of course he has that familiarity with Jim Harbaugh, and he also has time in Michigan, right? So they all are in that ecosystem of the Harbaugh tree, and he understands what it takes to win in Baltimore. But if he's not selected by the Ravens, I can definitely see Jesse Minter heading to the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins need that same thing I've been preaching, right? stability, culture, and of course competency. I'm not saying the Dolphins didn't have competent coaching. I wouldn't sit up here and say they didn't have a culture, right? But it may not have been the right fit. I think McDaniels, and I'll talk about him later in this podcast about where he could go. I think McDaniels was right for the moment, but not for the long term, because of course his way of coaching didn't last long due to quarterback play, unfortunately, personnel changes, and also I said Chris Smith earlier for the GM. It is Chris Greer. Chris Greer not really putting together around the best personnel for him, right? From a drafting standpoint. Yeah, he brought in Tyreek Hill. You know what I'm saying? They already had Waddle. You know, they went out there and paid for Jalen Ramsey via trade and so on and so forth. But as for McDaniel, I think he needed to establish an identity that was going to be sustainable. And I don't think he was able to do that because the Dolphins didn't really have a true identity with Mike McDaniel leading the way. And that was one of his biggest flaws as a head coach for this Dolphins team. So Jesse Minter, he comes over, brings that toughness, the leader of men mentality, right? Of course, that's something that was harped on McDaniel as well. He didn't have that good guide of being a leader of men. And also, I think pairing that up with John Eric Sullivan, the new GM coming from Green Bay, coaches talk, right? It could be Jeff Hafley in a sense because we all know about Hafley being the DC out there in Green Bay. They have continuity and familiarity. But I do believe Minter has been waiting for this moment, right? He has definitely been waiting for this. And I think he could be the next guy up where we say, damn, this could be Mike McDonald 2.0, but this time in the AFC down in the South with the Dolphins. And of course, they need to add some more pieces, but it just takes a few drafts, and I think that can definitely be a great addition for them. As for Miami as well, I mean, I got Chris Shula on here, same reasonings, and also Jeff Hafley. A wild card will be Robert Saleh. And I'll talk about Robert Saleh in a second here, but I want to quickly touch base on the Atlanta Falcons because I think the Falcons, in my opinion, they already have their head coaching pick. I think they're just waiting for him to to drop one in the playoff, right? I think the Atlanta Falcons will be hiring Clint Kubiak. I really do. All signs point to that. I think Matt Ryan, the new, I don't know if he is the EVP, but he definitely is a president of football operations for the Falcons. And I think the Falcons are doing what the Jaguars did last year, bringing in a former player that the Jaguars did with Tony Pacelli, right? Guy that understands what it takes to win with the Falcons. And of course, Matt Ryan did a ton of winning with the Falcons. And you bring that in and you kind of let Matt run the operation, grab the head coach first and Clint, and then you go out there and get the GM. Now, of course, they've been interviewing GMs, right? And I think the GM they do hire is going to be Ian Cunningham. Now, this is not me reading any crazy information. This is just me reading surface level stuff, knowing how the general management cycle has gone throughout these last few years, right? Ian Cunningham has been damn near a finalist for every single job for a GM spot for the last 4-5 years now, right? He damn near almost got the Jaguars job last year, but they decided to go with James Gladstone. But, I think Ian Cunningham will be an excellent pick. He's done some really amazing things as the assistant GM for the Bears in Chicago. A really good driving point of really helping guide Ryan Poles from a drafting and trade standpoint. And also, they did a really good job of bringing in talent throughout free agency and also the draft this past year, which is why the Bears are sitting in the divisional round and could be playing for a conference championship next week, right? But Ian comes over and he can pretty much inherit a team that's already talented. So what he needs to do is continue to stack the deck. As for Clint, though, I think this is an ideal fit because Clint has shown the capabilities of being able to work and develop quarterbacks. Before things went south with the Saints, he did a really good job of having that Saints offense on point. And Derek Carr is playing some of the best football of his career throughout the first month of that season, right? In 2024. And of course, injuries took a toll on that team, but we saw what Clint could do if he had a healthy offense and a decent quarterback. Fast forward to this year with the Seahawks. He was hired by Mike McDonald, an excellent hire by Mike, in my opinion, and he possibly could stay with the Seahawks and kind of do that Ben Johnson thing, right? He kind of waited out a few years and see, really develop, get better, but he's been around offenses for a long time. This is someone that's been a part of the Kyle Shanahan tree. the Mike Shanahan tree, the Gary Kubiak tree. Like he's been around a ton of football from a offensive play calling and coaching standpoint. So I'm quite sure he's ready. If not this year, definitely next year. But he was able to go over to Seattle and inherit an offense that everyone said that may take a step back because there's no Geno Smith. There's no Tyler Lockett. There's no DK Metcalf, so on and so forth, right? The offensive line is still has their issues, right? But what did they do? First of all, they did a really good job of bringing in personnel offensively, headlined by the draft selection and Gray Zabel. But what we saw was that one, the offensive line improved, and the Falcons already have a really talented offensive line, in my opinion, right? But we saw them be able to take it up a notch from a passing game standpoint and also be able to consistently strike with the run when they needed to. And we're seeing that right now during the end of the regular season, and also we may see it come postseason. But I think Sam Darnold had another productive year. Most importantly, they had an insane season with JSN, who led the league in receiving, all pro, damn near broke the receiving record if he would have had a more yard totals throughout this year. But you get the point I'm saying, right? Clint Kubiak is definitely a offensive mind you want to bring over as your head coach and take up what they currently have right now with this roster and Drake London and Kyle Pitts if he's able to retain Bijan Robinson, whoever the quarterback is next year, rather if it's someone they draft, free agency pickup, or Kirk Cousins. It maybe still might be Michael Penix Jr., right? You're not tied to the hip then, PJ, but you still have that. And they also have a lot of good pieces on defense. And I think, like I said, you want to be able to bring over high octane offense, but also you want to grab a offensive minded coach who's coming from a team that had a phenomenal defense, and the Seahawks had one of the better defenses in football, led by Mike McDonald. So you definitely want to be able to poach a position group coach or somewhere from your previous stint with the Niners, right? You want to be able to grab someone from these ecosystems, these trees that you can put together with your own staff, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I honestly don't see any other potential candidate right now for the Falcons aside from Clint Kubiak. It could be Kevin Stefanski. It could be Robert Saleh. But as of right now, I just think that, we haven't seen any really headline news, primarily because I've been reading that Matt Ryan and Arthur Blank want to respect Clint Kubiak and how he's going with the playoffs right now. But once the playoffs end, if they end this weekend, I'm quite sure Clint Kubiak is heading to Atlanta on a second interview, and they may not let him leave the building. That's my take on it. So we'll see. And as well for Ian Cunningham, too. They're being delicate and patient and respectable with his current focus being on the Bears advancing in the playoffs, too. But if either one of those guys lose this week, they're on the first flight to Atlanta, in my opinion. So I like that pairing of Clint and Ian for the Falcons going forward. All right, moving on. The next tier. I kind of went over those first four teams, right, on what I consider the tier one jobs. Maybe the Steelers may not be one, but still, those are the upper echelon jobs from a franchise that's been winning and, of course, talent, at their disposal. Real quickly, the Cardinals. I think Robert Saleh is an excellent fit there. Of course, he almost got a job last year, fresh off being fired from the Jets, but he had to wait a year. Of course, went to the Niners, got the best out of that football team again on defense, especially with the injuries they have at their disposal. He's going to the divisional round right now. He may advance to the NFC Championship with the team they got, surprisingly enough, right? Just a credit to their phenomenal coaching. But I think the Cardinals could definitely be looking towards Robert Saleh and who they want to bring in as their head coach. Like I've been saying pretty much throughout this entire conversation about these coaches: stability, culture, competent coaching, right? And maybe Robert Saleh doesn't have the stability in that winning culture, but he does bring in competent coaching. And I think with a better supporting cast offensively, young players on defense, and also an idea quarterback, rather if it's Kyler Murray or whoever they draft in this year, coming years, class. And I also do believe he'll bring over better OC type level of coordinating, right? Rather if it's a guy from the Shanahan tree, right? There's a Mike Shanahan out there. He could follow Robert Saleh too. I think it's either Mike or Matt. I know there's another Shanahan out there, right, on Niners right now. So he's also interviewing for OC jobs. So, keep it in the ecosystem, right? Keep it in that same tree. And I think Robert Saleh with a different opportunity at a more relaxed spot instead of being the headliner at New York with the Giants. I think the Cardinals, a second stint with the Cardinals as head coach will be a great fit for him. And of course, be out there and be that challenge to Kyle Shanahan and the Niners and the Rams and whatnot. He's very familiar with that division of football, so he can definitely kind of turn things around relatively quickly. Second option, in my opinion, is Kevin Stefanski, and I'll transition to him next because I think Kevin Stefanski in Las Vegas would be an ideal fit. Now, stability, culture, competent coaching, I think he does have that. It hasn't been pretty these last 2 years in Cleveland, but come on, now the Cleveland Browns, their personnel has been terrible. Being handcuffed by a terrible contract that was, a terrible trade in contract that was crafted up by Andrew Berry, that's hard to overcome. And Kevin Stefanski did that for, a bulk of his tenure there with the Browns. And of course, it came down to a very, crash bandicoot type end. But still, like I think Kevin Stefanski in a new scene with money to spend in free agency, with a potential quarterback day one in Fernando Mendoza, and also backing from John Spytek, Tom Brady, and Mike Davis, I think it'll be better. Now, of course, Antonio Pierce and other former Raider coaches and staff and front office executives say that, hey, it's deeper than the coaching out there, man. It's the guys who run everything on why this team continues to fail. And it very much well could be. It could be a Mike Davis fault. But at the end of the day, if you can just get the pairing right, Spytek brought in Pete Carroll last year, wasn't a good idea. A second run at this, Kevin Stefanski makes a lot of sense. Could see Vance Joseph, could be another wild card, right? I've been seeing that they've been interviewing they've interviewed the DC for the Texans. I forgot his name, right? But it could be anybody. But right now, I would probably say Kevin Stefanski makes a lot of sense. Tennessee. Hasn't really been much to be said about them. I mean, they've made their interviews very high profile, right? They won a Harbaugh. He interviewed with them, and I think it sounded as if he was deciding between the Giants, Falcons, and Titans, surprisingly, right? Because the Titans have some things you would probably want in a team, right? They have the quarterback, they have pieces on defense, sort of, kind of, right? But they have a lot of money to spend in free agency, and it's also a team you can kind of just, okay, let's scrap everything out that previously happened. Let's really rebuild, right? But most importantly, we have the quarterback in place. And if you have a quarterback and you have money in free agency, it gives you a lot of flexibility from a vacancy standpoint. But at the end of the day, Harbaugh went with the better option, which was the Giants, of course, right? So who will the Titans kind of like circle back to? The biggest name right now looks to be Matt Nagy, and a lot of fans won't agree with that. They don't like that because of the Matt Nagy time in Chicago, what he's shown from an offensive coordinating standpoint with the Chiefs recently. And he has that familiarity with, Mike Barganzi, who was the assistant general manager or executive out there in Kansas City a year or two ago. So, a lot of coaches, general managers, it's a brotherhood in this league, right? They want to keep everything familiar. Continuity is really big in this league, right? And going back to my three major pillars on what you want in a head coach: stability, culture, competent coaching. Does Matt Nagy provide that? Not really, but I will say, and from what I've been reading and researching and looking at his videos when he spoke about his sit downs, with teams that are interviewing him, right? He's been very public and open about and vulnerable about, like, yes, during my time in Chicago, I didn't dial it back enough, right? I didn't trust the coaching staff I hired. I didn't trust them. My hands was too much in the pot. That's why things went wrong. And I can agree, because the same thing with Robert Saleh with the Jets, right? And you can say the same thing for the Dolphins with Mike McDaniel. Right idea, long-term answer wasn't in place. Right idea, bad long-term answer. Because I think Matt Nagy has some promise to the Bears, right? They went to the postseason, right? I think he went to the postseason one time, and they had a 9-win season and an 8-win season, and of course everything came crumbling down in the third year. But there was something, and of course they didn't draft the quarterback they should have, Mitchell Trubisky, and I'm not sure if that was this guy he wanted, but that was the same class that had Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. So, I'm not sure if Matt Nagy vouched for Mitchell Trubisky, but still, like, you can really blame a lot of scenarios and situations on why Matt Nagy failed. And it may not only be on him, and it could be. I'm not a Bears fan. I'm not plugged into Bears football, Twitter, so on and so forth. They may say, hey, Matt Nagy was terrible, but I'm quite sure they'll say Matt Eberflus was better than Matt Nagy. I don't know though. But it's not going to be a sexy hire that blows the Titans head off by any stretch of the means, but it could be a competent hire, right? It could just bring them back to relevancy from an competing standpoint. You have other names out there, of course. We've seen Mike McCarthy recently, and I want to say there's a few other names out there, but it's not really the sexiest job vacancy right now, but they definitely could bring in a solid head coach, and they may want to go out there and hire an unproven guy, right? Someone that hasn't had head coaching experience, someone that can just grow with this team, but also it's a big risk because what if you go out there and hire an unproven head coach, someone who's never coached before, and you end up getting a guy like Nathaniel Hackett, right? And you end up firing him mid-season. You're just like all in this turnstile again. So, very interesting. They could go McDaniel too, and I'll transition to that next because ties back into the Cleveland Browns, who's the last team I'll talk about with the head coaching vacancies, because very interesting developments going on out there right now. A lot of fans and a lot of feeling it seems as if that they may be trying to poach the Jaguars offensive coordinator and Grant Udinski. One thing about Grant Udinski is that he is very young, right? I'm 28. I just turned 28 in December. He is 30. I think he just turned 30. And if not, he's going on 31. Regardless, though, really young, right? And he may very well be the youngest head coach that's been hired in NFL history, if not in history, in a very long time. Because I'm not mistaken, Sean McVay was hired at 34. It could be that situation. Who knows? But I think with Sean McVay, he had a lot more years under his belt from a play calling and coaching standpoint. Just recently, Grant took over as a quarterbacks coach in Minnesota, learning under KOC, right? This year, he became an OC, but he's not calling his own plays. But he is definitely more hands-on with quarterback development and also offensive game planning. And we saw what he's done with Trevor. Of course, Liam was a big part of that too. But we've seen the development in the coaching he's done with Trevor, which makes him a very appealing head coach. Is he ready, though? Because at 30, it's really hard to lead men at 30, let alone 35, 36, right? But being 30, the entire roster is damn near older than you or the same age as you or just a little bit under you, right? So you have guys like Myles Garrett. He's 31, right? You know what I'm saying? Not saying Myles Garrett isn't coachable, but how can you get to guys like that have been in this league, future Hall of Famers, so on and so forth? It's not easy. It's not easy being a young person in charge, leading a group of adults, especially grown men. And they have to believe in you, right? Now, I do believe if you can pair him with a Jim Schwartz who's currently on the roster or currently on the staff, that'd be perfect. That'd be ideal, right? You have the young, innovative, hot shot, next big thing at the head coaching level. And you have that seasoned veteran, former head coach who's been around this game a very long time, and also an excellent defensive coordinator, right? That'd be a great pairing. And also, you pretty much can give, if he's not already labeled this, Jim Schwartz, assistant head coach, responsibilities, right? Or if you don't go that direction, you can bring in someone that, just like Robert Saleh, just like Brian Flores, wasn't successful enough at his first stop, his first stint. But if you give him another opportunity with this team, with better staff in place, along with leadership in place, not saying the Browns have that, but if you can pair up Mike McDaniel with a Jim Schwartz, that'll be ideal as well. Now, of course, Mike has been known not to be the best leader of men, and also having a team that has been relatively soft. And you're going to Miami. You're coming from Miami to Cleveland, colder weather. And we all know the Dolphins during his time in Miami were not good at playing in cold weather conditions. Now, that could just be a Miami thing. I don't know. But, typically a lot of Florida teams go in these cold weather games and they play relatively well. I can't remember the last time a Dolphins team won more than one time in the season in cold weather. Or I know it happened a few times here and there, but consecutive, doesn't really ring a bell to me. So, especially with McDaniel being in charge. But that could be a pairing. McDaniel, Schwartz, Udinski, Schwartz. But all in all, it definitely ties back to all this from my three major pillars: stability, culture, and competent head coaching. And hopefully, he can bring over winning hope culture, right? Because that's what everyone wants. That's what every organization wants. That's what every franchise wants: a winning culture. So that's my take on these coaches. We'll see what happens. We'll talk more in depth about that, especially when they get hired. But as of right now, those are my predictions. And that's how I feel about the overall NFL head coaching vacancies and also jobs that already been taken, like Harbaugh going to the Giants. Moving on, last segment. Sorry, podcast is kind of long. Forgive me. Like I said, if you already skipped here, I appreciate you for doing so. But let's get into the playoffs real quick. Divisional round. We have Saturday and Sunday games. No night game for Sunday. Very interesting. Maybe because something going on Sunday. I don't know the TV program, but yes, let's go. Saturday, 4:30. Bills and Broncos. That is the first game of the Saturday slate. I got the Bills in this game. The Broncos are entering this matchup as a 1 seed, and I talked about it during my original playoff bracket preview. I do believe at least 1 seed will get popped in the first round, and I think it will be the Broncos. So I came across this crazy stat, right? When I was trying to really break down the winner of this Bills and Broncos game, and I saw a stat that said Bo Nix. Let me see this. Bo Nix is 1-8 versus winning teams that score more than 17 points. Pretty damn crazy, right? Pretty damn crazy. I think the Bills will win this game. I think Josh Allen's on a mission right now. The winter soldier, right? Saw him in Jacksonville when he played us. 80% completion percentage. Granted, the Broncos have a better defense than us, probably a better home environment than us as well, and they have a better scheme that can kind of rough up Josh given their pass rush and also better cornerback play. But I think given this guy's on a mission right now, you can see the look in his eyes, you can see the play, and I think guys like James Cook will have a bigger impact in this matchup. I think the Bills win. Close one, but I think the Bills win a score of 30-28. I can definitely see that, especially with Sean McDermott coaching as well. I think he did a really good job of scheming up against Liam Cohen, kind of had Liam in the box a bit, making Liam uncomfortable. And I think that definitely will affect Sean Payton in this game, where Bo Nix may be uncomfortable and having to, try to run the football when the Broncos haven't been one of the better running teams in football in quite some time now. So we'll see how that pans out. But I do believe the Bills grab this one on the road in Buffalo and they head to the conference championship. All right. Saturday night game, Seahawks, Niners. I have the Seahawks winning. The Niners are too banged up. Even though Sam Darnold was questionable with an oblique injury, which is pretty crazy. But I think given that injury, they may run the ball a bit more. And I think the Seahawks, the way to close out the year against the Niners a few weeks ago, being able to punish the Niners on the running attack with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, I think they can replicate the same results, similar results, and just suffocate them on defense, right? Granted, Kyle Shanahan will have a better game plan. He'll put up more than 3 points, but this isn't Philly you're going up against a defensive standpoint. I think the Seahawks defense is a tier better than Philly's, right? Even though they had a championship defense in Philly as well. But I think the Seahawks defense is for real. And I think having that familiarity, being able to have the X's and O matchup against Kyle Shanahan, who they faced twice this year, I think Mike McDaniel can capitalize on that, given that he's matched up a few weeks ago, and have a similar response in this game. So I got the Seahawks winning, not comfortably, but winning by at least a touchdown, I would say for sure. Sunday games, 3 o'clock matchup, Patriots, Texans. I think the Patriots grab this one. Given the fact that, yes, this Texans defense is for real. They are a championship caliber defense, right? One of the better defenses we've seen in football from a continuity and totality standpoint in quite some time. But I think the quarterback play of Stroud has been miserable. That game against the Steelers, I don't care what the box score says. If you actually watch the game, he played terrible, bad football. And I think if that shows up on Sunday, they will lose. And I think he will show up on Sunday. I have them losing. I think the Patriots being at home, their defense can get after it, cause some issues up front, stop the run. The Texans tried to establish a running attack. They stopped that and make Stroud beat them with no Nico Collins because he's in concussion protocol right now, having to rely on Christian Kirk, Xavier Hutchinson, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, Dalton Schultz. I got this Patriots winning, man. It'll be a close one because the Texans defense is for real, but give me the Patriots like 21-17, in my honest opinion. And I think they could get that extra 7 points off a potential defensive scoring touchdown for the Texans. So give me the Patriots 21-17. night game, evening game, I guess you can say, 6:30 on Sunday, Rams and Bears. Very exciting matchup, in my opinion. Sean McVay versus Ben Johnson, two offensive gurus, two defenses who haven't been playing their best, but the Rams defense, I would probably take them, although they did get lit up a bit by Bryce Young. This is the game where these are two teams that really can't get out their own way from slow starts or just being able to maintain a lead, right? The Rams, slow starts, being unable to maintain leads, right? Not being able to salt away games enough, in my opinion, especially these last few weeks. The Bears getting off to really rough starts, being too much of gamblers, right? Having that 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 football god help in senses, right? You know what I'm saying? A lot of miracle, I would say, play goes into their work, right? Just being the cardiac bears, what they say, not giving up, not giving in, a lot of one-score victories. It's all fine and dandy this year, but how will it play out against a team that has been there, done that, right? However, I think the Bears win. I think they do get off to a rough start, but given how the Rams have played, they may get off to a rough start as well. And this may be a game where you're looking at halftime, it's like 14-10, and the Rams are only up by 4 points. And you're looking at like, damn, the Rams have done all this and only up by 4 points, kind of like we saw against the Panthers last week. But I think this week, the Bears take advantage of it because they've been the cardiac Bears, being able to come back and come back fashion and whatnot. And also, it's hard to shut this team down, right? If they're in the fourth quarter, if they're in the game, they're going to come through and play big, especially with Caleb Williams being the closer and able of Ben Johnson scheming, calling up plays, and the ability to run the football will be big in this game as well. So I got the Bears in upset fashion. So yeah, I have Pats, Bills, Conference Championship, AFC, Seahawks, Bears, NFC Conference Championship the following week. So let me know what y'all think. Thank y'all for tapping in. This is a very fun podcast. A lot more length in this show, but nevertheless, great content per usual. So I thank y'all for tapping in. Thank you for subscribing, commenting, and sharing this show. I'll be back next week to talk more coaching hires, free agency, draft, maybe, but also covering a lot more playoff action as well, man. So until next time, thank y'all for tapping in. Thank y'all so much for tapping in, man. It really means a lot to me. Until next time, that is a wrap.